The history of Denel is a fascinating one.
Dr. Ernest P. Chad, PhD, THC, CBD, KMS, and historian of the year 2016. I also have a secondary degree in Denelic, Boralia and Daughtris relations.
The events surrounding the rise and fall of the Palagian Empire are of particular intrigue to enthusiasts and scholars alike.
I am Dr. Well E. Quick. I have a PhD in Math Boy Studies, Denel Studies, and I'm an expert in the field of Serifrium culture.
A proud people, the idea of an empire emboldened their lust for greatness.
My name is Dr. Din Dor. I have a double PhD in Math Boy Studies and Denel Studies, and I am the second fellow at the Crammeram Institute for Math Boy Layman Relations.
In a world where doctrine is the driving force behind decisions, where warfare is so rampant, where rapid advances in technology increase the scale of war, one could say that the Palagian Empire initiated the climax of conflict in Denel. Some of the nation-states and tribespeople to get pulled into the conflicts surrounding the empire did so out of necessity, others for their own doctrinal ambitions. Imperialization proved to be pivotal, and it deserves the research, documentation, and analysis that it receives. The single factor that set Denel on a course for constant conflict was the initial founding of the empire, an event that meant the region would flourish at the cost of many lives.
The Palagian Empire would thrust Denel into a period of destabilization. It would force up-and-coming nations to rethink not only their doctrine, but their diplomatic positions.
And indeed, Pelagia would become the first true nation-state in Denel. The early tribes of the region developed rudimentary trade routes, and soon a vast network of villages spanned the vast country.
What you have to understand is that Pelagia was massive in stature, not just for its time, but even during events such as the Boralian Rain, most who migrated from Perinon ended up here, and tribes formed so quickly. So in reality, the people of Pelagia had a huge head start in the nation-state development.
In central Pelagia sits the Goots Highlands, a region rich in natural resources and fresh water flowing from the great Perinon River. It is here where the Pelagians' capital city, Pelagus, would be founded. Sitting atop the highest hill in the Goots Highlands, it would prove to be impenetrable from foreign attackers, and thus stood the test of time.
So, the leading theory behind the success of Pelagius was honestly its geographic location. To put it simply, it was unraidable, so the best and the brightest flocked there. The only challenge was getting fresh water up the highlands, a challenge quickly but efficiently overcome by those living there.
With Pelagus firmly established, Pelagia could now focus on consolidating their tribes, which they did. In the Centena 95, under the leadership of Emperor Janowicks Gomren, the Palagian Empire was founded. Suddenly, this unprecedented shift in power sent Denel into a chasm of political and military instability.
So Gomren saw what was happening across the rift and took note. The people of Daughtris Centari were talking about unification, and he did what any smart leader would do by beating them to the punch, solidifying his position as the dominant power in Denel.
With the empire established, Gomren would move to consolidate his position by force. Gomren sent out on a campaign of bloodshed throughout the entire continent of Perinon. The period of 96 Centena 1070 Donner through 1110 Donner, the vast armies of the Palagian Empire would sweep through the continent, pillaging villages and capturing cities, killing anyone who would dare stand in their way. For the people of Jondo and Cantanoa, the idea of Pelagian occupation was not well received.
So, yeah, the mass eastern incursion. Historians liken this to a battle, but it was more of a slaughter. When Jondian and Cantanoan resistance went up, Pelagia doubled down. Their goal was simple: take the continent.
What's interesting about the continental expansion conflict is the resistance put up by some of the independent tribes in the region after all was lost. Still, they wanted to punish the Pelagians. They got together and launched a foolhardy attack on Gatra, and as you can probably guess, we all know how that ended.
There was little that the people of the independent tribes of Perinon could do. The vast armies of Pelagia were well trained and well equipped, and Denel had never seen anything like this conflict in the past. The sheer organization and willpower displayed by the Imperial Army was enough to force the people of the continent to bend the knee to Emperor Gomren.
The Cleep Clop didn't have to move inside the Jippity Dapper. The only reason we got enough Cheaty Crat in the Glippity Profundus was the lack of Cracker Daggers.
Put it in the chacky, take it down to the lackety backety. Choo choo goo boo, doggerdy, peekashleep. Turn it around, daka daka bing bong.
Historians question Klugelwoo, Gibbity Gobble, Tubity Gasleepin, Gabbity Machaggity. But there's much evidence to suggest Chacky Dacky Mohopums. When thoroughly investigated, Loopy, Oopy, Voop, Bop, Cheeky, Clieky, Ream Deem is not a valid argument. Chaka, 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 Daka.
Only the people of Mernat's Crossing could put up a reasonable defense. This region is a hotbed for the scientists and scholars of Denel, and thus the city was well developed, and well fortified.
Janowicks Gomren was a warmonger, but he was also a man of class. And believe me when I tell you that when it came to Murnat's Crossing, he wasn't going to pillage the place. In fact, he attended War College at Murnat's Crossing, so if anything, Gomren wanted to say, no, Murnat's Crossing is going to stay independent.
For now, Murnat's Crossing would be spared by the Imperial Army. In the Emperor's eyes, Murnat's Crossing was off limits. In fact, throughout this conflict, the Emperor would maintain regular correspondence with Charles Bainsburn, headmaster at the John Doe College of Warfare.
Bainsburn taught Gomren when he was at the college, an incredible thing considering his favoritism of the city. What's even more serendipitous is that the class Gomren had with Bainsburn was the college's legendary seminar on winning the hearts and minds of the enemy. Spectacular.
During the Emperor's campaign of Perinon, and during his correspondence with Charles, the two would discuss tactics, how best to capture and hold on to the land he conquered. Some of the written letters uncovered by archaeologists showed that Emperor Gomren grew wary that a counteroffensive was about to be carried out. The continent was under imperial control for over 100 Donner without any significant resistance.
In enough time for the Chickadee Clacker to get the information to Rickety Yokatok, we didn't need the Chicklockety to go down to the Poofy Doofy.
It turned out that the Emperor's fears would prove true. In 96 Centina 1230 Donner, a coalition of tribes had consolidated their forces to strike back at the Imperial Army. The coalition would choose Vercingetorix of Wakefield to assume command of the coalition's modestly sized army. Vercingetorix, a native of the Palagian Basinland, held a resentment of the Gomren regime and chose to strike at the heart of the empire at Gatra, the imperial-named capital city.
Gatra was the seat of the throne of the Palagian Empire for several reasons before the capital was even moved to Plagus. It sits on the Bay of Gomren and made it easy to move between East and West Pelagia. To capture this city would have spelled success for the coalition, and Vercingetorix knew this.
The coalition amassed their forces and engaged in a land-based siege that lasted 3 Donner. In the first 2 Donner, the coalition bombarded the city with rudimentary siege weapons designed by volunteer engineers from Cheshire City in southern Pelagia-occupied Cantanoa.
The cheeky deaky went around and around. Clipper dippers and clipper duppers as far as the eye could see. You couldn't walk 5 seconds in one direction without stepping in some yippity-bippity tippity-nippity klooper-dooper.
On the 3rd Donner of the siege, the coalition army would charge the city, Chief Vercingetorix leading the charge. Military scholars would go on to note that the charge was fleety, mostly due to the chief's impatience combined with his lust for vengeance.
What's important to note is that the coalition had a real chance to capture Gatra. The bulk of the imperial armies were spread out. If Chief Vercingetorix had been more patient, things would have turned out differently.
Vercingetorix separated his army into 3 groups, Army Groups A, B, and C. Each group occupied a spot outside the city in a semicircle, effectively blocking off the city. When word had gotten to a nearby Imperial contingent that Gatra was under siege, they immediately rerouted to move and intercept. This contingent was weak and unorganized.
And if you wondered why the Tingle Wingo didn't circle around the drain and fall down the hole, you wouldn't be the only one. How many Toggle Peaky Chacks do you think were lost? Probably 7.
If Vercingetorix had continued his siege, it is likely that Army Group B could have fended off the contingent, while Army Groups A and C continued the siege and blockaded the city. Instead, Vercingetorix ordered the 3 army groups to charge. As a result, the contingent sent to help the defender of Gatra flanked the coalition forces. Vercingetorix would be killed during the ensuing chaos.
So Vercingetorix gets ahead of himself, and that's all she wrote. Any hope of restoring the status quo went right out the window, And now Gomren had this sense of godliness and would start acting with impunity.
With the coalition's defeat, the Palagian Empire now occupied Perinon without contest. There was one small exception in the southeast, Perinon. An ancient land and cradle of all mankind in Denel, Perinon would be a trophy for now Emperor Carian Maldrum.
So the Empire is flourishing. People are migrating to live there, and things are generally good. Then, all of a sudden, the new Emperor Carian Maldrum decides it's time to take Perinon. Carian was known for his ego, and taking Perinon would see him achieve godhood.
When talking about the Perinon incursion, the thing you have to remember is Emperor Gomren's feelings towards Mernat's Crossing. It stands in the Empire's way at a critical juncture, and Carion doesn't exactly care.
Emperor Maldrum weighed his options. With his sights set on Perinon, his generals all let him know that Mernat's Crossing would have to be secured. If they did not capture Mernat's Crossing, the Imperial armies would have to move through the mountains east of Jondo to circumvent the Dowry Channel. Emperor Maldrum made the decision to take Mernat's Crossing, to get through to Perinon. The Imperial armies, no longer spread thin, launched a surprise attack on the city.
Boobity, toobity, choopity, capper napper, rappa, tappa, dap jap, dippity, dop, toopity, top.
Now, all of a sudden, the Empire has war goals in Perinon? I don't think so. Their humiliation at the hands of the cults of Haven's Realm was exactly what they deserved.
There was very little resistance. Despite the robust guard force stationed there, the battle would be over in a little over half a donner. Mernat's Crossing still retained its name and sovereignty, but they would be forced to quarter the Imperial armies as they staged their invasion of Perinon. To get to Haven's Realm, the present-day capital of Perinon, the Empire would have to trek the massive land bridge that connects the two landmasses.
As we all know, the first humans lived on Perinon, and a fringe group of them wanted to explore. And the only reason they were able to do this is because the technology had gotten to the point where they knew that there was more land out there. And the humans were also extremely adept at using relic magic. And using that, they terraformed the giant land bridge that we all still see today, connecting Perinon and Perinon. And some of the remnants have been living at Haven's Realm ever since, and they've mostly been left alone out of respect.
Word of the seizure of Mernat's Crossing reached the people of Haven's Realm, and they staged their own defenses. The battle for the land bridge would set the stage for this conflict. General Trudman would command the Imperial forces in this conflict, and accordingly he did not send a large force to secure the land bridge. Intelligence suggested that there would be little to no resistance there, though the people of Haven's Realm, under the command of High Atarch Julian Vasir, proved that they would not yield the land bridge without a fight.
The High Atarch is a coveted position for the people of Haven's Realm. They are usually a quasi-head of state and commander of military forces. Unluckily for the Empire, Vesiar was something of a nationalist and would not go quietly.
And thus, the battle was underway. The battle consisted mostly of a siege-based tug-of-war, with a few skirmishes breaking out between small infantry forces. Ultimately, the defenders would be pushed back, and the Pelagians suffered minor casualties. Thanks to General Trudman, the small force sent to take the land bridge had with it its most advanced siege weapons, and it proved to work against the defenders' outdated siege equipment. After taking the land bridge, It would be some time before General Trudman would order the first siege of Havensrealm. During this time, the people of Havensrealm had time to shore up defenses, including a series of terraformed barricades meant to impair the movement of the Imperial siege weapons.
Now remember, these are the descendants of the first humans we're talking about. Their skill with relic magic is unmatched. When they lost the land bridge, they erected these massive structures, terraformed with relic magic. They were composites of rock, mineral, and other organic materials that were sturdier than any Palagian-made metal.
Though stronger than Palagian steel, the structures crumbled under the firepower of their siege weapons. Maybe, to Havensrealm's benefit, the Palagians were slowed down. Their siege engines needed to expend their munitions, but ultimately they were able to get through and stage outside Havensrealm with no problem. After that, the first siege of Havensrealm was underway. General Trudman would order a siege barrage, followed by a probing infantry attack on a loop, though the defenses of Havensrealm did not buckle. Both sides took casualties, and the Pelagians were forced to retreat. Furious, General Trudman sent a much larger force this time to siege the city. This would be known as the Second Siege of Havensrealm. Using similar tactics, the counter-siege fire from Havensrealm proved robust, and the Pelagians were once again forced to retreat. Finally, General Trudman ordered a third siege, which ended similarly. The defenses of Havensrealm were steadfast.
So after 3 failed sieges, the cults had had enough. The Imperial army was already low on morale and splintered, so the people of Havensrealm charged their staging areas. They were less skilled in martial combat, but they were still hardy, and successfully forced the Pelagians out of the land bridge and back into Jondo.
Low on supplies, and having taken many casualties, Emperor Maldrum ordered General Trudman to withdraw his troops from the region and abandon their campaign.
This was a major blunder. It's believed that this was the start of the downfall of the Palagian Empire, as it showed the Imperial Army's weaknesses. The shame General Trudman had from this defeat drove him to take his own life.
Pelagia and the Centina to follow would engage in conflicts here and there, quelling uprisings and keeping peace in their kingdom. With peace came room for prosperity, and the Palagian Empire quickly became the center of lavish living and scientific advancement. It was clear in Pelagia's expansion that a nation-state, empire or not, can only expand so much before another comes to take the glory. This would come in the form of Boralia and Daughtris Centari discontinuing any appeasement that may have been admissible in the past. In 262 Centina, Emperor Idlian Pakau decided it was time to fully seize the entire continent of Perinon. In the time since the Empire's attempted seizing of Parthenon, a city and several villages sprouted up in southwestern Perinon in what is now Creole. These settlements, notably New Chorus and Morristown, had been seeking independence from the Empire for some time, with the help of envoys sent from Daughtris Centari.
Daughtris Centari was at a point where they were capable of sending envoys across the Strait of Jabris to influence local politics. Of course, the Emperor didn't take too kindly to this. And bloodshed, well, it became a real possibility.
And thus, the First Pelagian War was underway. It started with the siege of New Chorus, the capital of the separatists backed by Daughtris envoys. Under the command of General Baxter, the Imperial Army sent a sizable siege force to take the city. The size of the Imperial armies at this point was unprecedented, and there were notable challenges with the command and signal infrastructure. Despite this, the force sent to take New Chorus was successful, and the Empire took few casualties. Once New Chorus was taken, the rest of the separatists in the region fled to Daughtris Centari, with the exception of a few who stayed at Morristown on the northern coast of present-day Creole. For many Donner, the onslaught would continue. The Palagian armies would rampage the continent as they did centena prior, seeking out and destroying any signs of dissent. The Emperor was unhinged at this point and war-hungry. After the Empire's first defeat at Perinon, they mostly removed their forces from Mernat's Crossing. This gave them ample time to revitalize their defenses and remain autonomous. This didn't sit well with Emperor Idlian, who sought to fly the imperial banners in the city permanently. They did just that. In 263 Centena, the imperial armies invaded and captured the city, resulting in a massacre of men, women, and children alike. During this time, imperial lands would be attacked for the first time in the Basinland. Under the command of Chief Grounds Marshal Bosch, Daughtris Centari bombarded the Basinland city of Wakefield, landed, and broke through imperial defenses at Beckinsale to establish a foothold in Perinon.
This was truly a great moment in history. Never did anyone think that Pelagia could be attacked on their home front. But all of a sudden, 5 Centauri legions were camped out in their backyard. Chief Grounds Marshal Bosch would be decorated for his success in the Basinland.
The Pelagian High Command would start to make more and more foolhardy tactical decisions. Soon after getting word of Daughtris Centari breaking through in the Basinland, they ordered the Imperial Army Group East, under the command of Centauri Primus Michael Allen, to march once again on Perinon. He was baffled, but had no option in the matter.
Pelagian High Command at the time was being helmed by Centauri Primus Elitus Duke Finn Dodric. This was a man of ambition, and even sought emperorship before Emperor Pakau was crowned. He would go to any lengths to make a name for himself in the now crumbling empire.
Rerouting an entire army group would take ample time, resources, and manpower to accomplish. Still, they moved on Havensrealm. They were ordered to begin the siege at half strength, unorganized, and were easily repelled by the now even more bolstered defenses of Havensrealm. Now, Army Group East was in even more disarray, and wouldn't be able to reinforce Army Group West with the now encroaching threat of the Centauri legions. In the west, the people of Morristown were in a precarious situation. Army Group West, under the command of Centauri Primus Bo Yuri, was at full fighting strength. Centauri Primus Yuri moved Army Group West on Morristown, and in the spirit of the Battle of Mernat's Crossing, slaughtered anything that moved. General Baxter, who was now commanding Army Group Center, would now be ordered to invade the Isle of Chorus.
Anyone can see the position Pelagia found itself in. Invaded by Daughtris Centari, it was only a matter of time before Boralia joined the fray. They had to move fast, because if they could take Chorus, they could take the kingdom, and stage raids from there on Boralian territories.
Chorus is relatively uninhabited. Once General Baxter rallied his troops at the imperial port city of Torif, they set sail and landed on the northern coast. They faced no resistance from the local inhabitants. The Empire's banner now unfurled abroad, the imperial reach extended beyond the continent of Perinon for the first time. In their efforts to now invade the kingdom, Admiral Visant Talmadge of the Imperial Fleet would engage in a destructive deadlock with the fleets of the kingdom. Meanwhile, in the Basinland, Daughtris Centari was conducting a series of irregular troop movements. The movements baffled Pelagian High Command. They couldn't see that this was new doctrine at work, and there was no counter yet.
The Centauri legions, while untested, were fresh and eager to make their debut on the global stage of warfare. They moved fast and with a purpose. I can only imagine being a Pelagian general, not being able to make heads or tails, of their movements.
Meanwhile, in the Intercontinental Rift, Admiral Visant managed to move a battle group around the bulk of the Kingdom fleet, moving to the northern coast of the Kingdom city of Fumigan. They bombarded the city from the sea, and landed a modest invasion force there under the command of Commander Janowicks. While Pelagia took heavy casualties, they now had a base of operations in the kingdom. While Army Group Center was busy reorganizing in the kingdom, Army Group West was losing ground. Daughtris Centari was on the move in the Basinland, continuing their irregular troop movements. General Baxter redirected a sizable defense force to the imperial port city of Morsari and prepared to defend its west flank. What he did not realize is that the Centauri legions bypassed Morsari and marched directly to East Hill.
East Hill. Probably the most overlooked vantage point in this entire war. The decision to attack East Hill instead of the port city just added on to Marshal Bosch's successes in this campaign. His actions defied expectations, much to the benefit of Daughtris Centari.
Because Army Group West was preoccupied at the port city, little resistance was offered at East Hill, and the legions were able to establish a foothold there, now even deeper into Palagian territory.
If you look at a map of the Basinland, you'll see why this hill is so important. It's strategic, as it sits adjacent to Landline River, which is a river that flows parallel to the landline, an area that is heavily fortified to prevent major incursion campaigns.
Once the hill was captured, the real battle would commence. It was Bosch's intention to destroy the Imperial defenses on the landline so they could push further inland. As such, Chief Grounds Marshal Bosch utilized the landline river to float a modestly sized invasion force behind the defenders of the landline, yet another major achievement by the now veteran Grounds Marshal. Because the attack came from behind, and because General Baxter was expecting the assault to take place at Morsari, the defenders of the landline were caught entirely off guard, and Daughtris Centari captured the landline. General Baxter and Army Group West were encircled and facing attrition on a massive scale.
So after he gets his entire army group encircled, General Baxter is desperate, so he sails his entire force from his encircled location to Portanimus Maestro to siege the city. He wanted to not only cut off supply lines, but to also incite a Centauri retreat from Pelagia. Neither worked.
In his foolhardy attempt to salvage his dire situation, General Baxter was killed in the siege of Portanius Maestro, and Army Group West was out of commission. Many were killed, and the rest were captured and held prisoner on Daughtris Centari's soil. Meanwhile, in the north, Admiral Visant was conducting a massive fleet maneuver to try and secure the west coast of the kingdom. During this movement, they were engaged by several Sarl raiding vessels. When Pelagia invaded Chorus, the Sarl of Glacia were informed that any Imperial ship was fair game, and the Sarl took advantage. During the battle, a Boralian scout ship was able to see the ensuing chaos. They relayed the information to High Admiral Donovan of Boralia's principal battle fleet, who rallied his ships and also engaged the Pelagians. The ensuing naval battle would see the destruction of the Pelagian fleet in the north, and the capture of Commander Janowicks' invasion force. Both Visant and Janowicks would die in the battle, and Pelagia's occupation abroad came to a swift end.
At this point, the Empire was in a strategic deficit. When their fleet in the north was destroyed, a combined Boralian-Silverland invasion force was sent to Torif, where the city was decimated by a barrage of cannon fire from a very modern, very deadly fleet. Torif would be abandoned before a ground fight could even break out.
Now, Pelagia was fighting on two fronts, with Daughtris Centari, Boralia, and Silverland. By this time, Daughtris Centari helped the people of New Chorus revitalize their militias, and sent them back to New Chorus and opened up a third front in the southwest. Boralia and Daughtris Centari were now fully communicating on their combined effort to force Pelagia to capitulate, and it was decided that Boralia leave a small garrison at Torif and move the rest of their invasion force to the northern tip of Perinon, so there was no chance of escape. On top of that, Daughtris Centari could now invade from the south, effectively pincering the rest of the Imperial army. Due to massive exposure, the named imperial capital city of Gatra was abandoned. The rest of the Imperial army moved all their resources to the real capital in Pelagus. Soon, Boralia and Daughtris Centari would effectively blockade the city and bombard it with siege fire for several Donner, resulting in the ultimate surrender of the Palagian Empire.
If it weren't for Boralia and Centauri intervention, the Empire would have outright pillaged all of Janelle. Ironically enough, some things are in order, as it forced everyone to innovate so tyrants would never have complete power.
After the First Pelagian War, the nation-state of Pelagia was allowed to remain imperial, though there were now new nation-states carved out in southern Perinon, Creole, Cantanoa, Jekker, Greater Cantanoa, and Jondo would gain sovereignty, and the Palagian Empire would only exist in the northern part of the continent.
The period after the First Pelagian War was a period of tumultuous political upheaval. Idlian Pakau's emperorship was no longer recognized by a large portion of the Pelagian population. On top of that, his successor, Odoler Doem, had an uneventful tenure as emperor. What's more is that the First Pelagian War would see Boralia and Daughtris Centari rise to the decided level of global superpower. The island proxy wars being their struggle to see who would come out on top. A short conflict, but surely cemented the intense rivalry shared between the two nation-states. In 277 Centena, Regis Kalman was crowned emperor of the Palagian Empire.
You may recognize the name, Regis Kalman. He's the head of state of present-day Pelagia. His brother, East Pelagia. A lot of scholars look at Kalman as the reincarnation of Emperor Gomren, a tactical genius. He was beloved by his people and would use it to his advantage.
Emperor Kalman capitalized on Boralia and Daughtris Centari's preoccupation with their proxy war to reinvigorate the imperial armies, as well as remilitarize the landline, which had been demilitarized as part of the peace agreement after their capitulation in the First Pelagian War. When the time was right, Kalman once again thrust Pelagia into a global war. Under the command of General Lyrian Redford, the imperial armies were segregated into 4 groups: Army Group A, Army Group B, the Home Guard, and Expeditionary Group. General Redford ordered the Expeditionary Group to sail to Portanius Maestro. This would mark the beginning of the Second Pelagian War. Under the command of Forward General Robert Goldfrey, the Expeditionary Group decimated the Centauri port city. The Pelagian fleet was modernized and packed a heavy punch as they bombarded the shore with new and improved cannons. Portanimus Maestro would fall for the first time into enemy hands, and Pelagia now had a foothold in Caxton. Meanwhile, the Home Guard reinforced the landline to prevent incursion from the lower provinces of Perinon, and Army Groups A and B begun taking strategic positions. Caught completely off guard, Daughtris Centari regrouped and attempted a counter-siege at Perinon Maestro.
This was probably the worst time for Daughtris Centari to engage in a serious conflict. They were in the middle of standing up a brand new special forces unit at the time, the Perinon, and the 3 military chiefs had just been appointed and not ready for a real-world conflict.
Marshal Ewan of the 1st Legion was the closest, and rallied his troops for an attempted counter-siege at the port city from its northern flank. His men were quickly dispatched by the zealous Palagian army. Commanding the expeditionary group, Forward General Tim Tao Tao marched his men on the Centauri city of Roduk Major. Now the expeditionary army could start pushing more inland, while Army Group A started landing en masse at Perinon Maestro to fully occupy their captured territories.
Roduk Major was the central training hub for the Centauri military. It sits on the southern coast of the Eastern Channel, and losing it would be devastating. What Forward General Tao Tao did was bypass Helmfirth, as Roduk Major was actually his primary target, while Army Group B dealt with the defenders at Helmfirth.
Forward General Tim Tao Tao had no problem securing Roduk Major, even bypassing some smaller villages along the way. In the past, Pelagians would raze everything in their path, showing Emperor Kalman's change in doctrine. With the intention to continue the invasion of Daughtris Centari, Army Group B, now under the command of Forward General Keller, would move up to take Urk Bridge to avoid moving his army through the thickest portions of the Green Forest. Furthermore, the decision to take the bridge meant Army Group B wouldn't have to waste time sieging the city of Fortar, as it would be encircled if the bridge could be taken, and it was. Meanwhile, Army Group A, under the command of Forward General Kart Karlstalin, was sailing from Torif to the Boralian port city of Manda. General Karlstalin and his forces delivered a swift and crushing blow to Boralia on this Donner, and now the war would be opened up on 2 fronts.
Emperor Kalman had a score to settle. After the humiliation the Empire faced after the First Palagian War, it was all bets off, and the Palagian Empire wanted to control all of Denel. They were going to do it smart though, and that was showing through their tactful employment of their new doctrine.
Several Donner later, 2 major battles would commence. The battle for Haemon's Wake and the battle for Rentaria Major, the capitals of both Boralia and Daughtris Centari. The coordinated strike was very carefully planned, and mostly successful. Army Group B had an easier time sieging the Centauri capital, while Army Group A found a tougher fight in Boralia. The plan for Haemon's Wake was to siege the city from the sea in the Bay of Cranes, while the brunt of Army Group A attacked the main gates from land. There was a miscommunication, however, and the siege from the Bay of Cranes started before the infantry had a chance to begin their charge. The infantry would be routed and soundly defeated by Boralia's 3rd Principal Ground War Brigade. The Pelagian fleet would retreat and regroup at Manda. In the south, Army Group B successfully captured Rentaria Major after a lengthy and costly battle.
To the untrained eye, it seemed that the Empire was about to win it all. But I can tell you that this is where the cracks would start to show. The Empire was spread invariably thin, and it was only a matter of time before Boralian High Command capitalized, and they did so when they invaded the Pelagian mainland.
The city of Chessex lies on the western face of the northern Perinonian Spine mountain range. This would be the target for the 1st Ground War Brigade of Boralia. They had to move fast to capitalize on Pelagia's defeat at Haemon's Wake, and sailed from Dalmellington to siege Chessex. In their haste, only the siege and cavalry components of the brigade landed, with the other components still far behind. The order still came down that the siege must begin, even though they were only at half strength.
Here is where Titus Aurelius, the present Grand Marshal of the Boralian Expeditionary League, makes his debut. He was a bombardier general at the time and was commanding the skeleton siege crew at Chessex when he was ordered to start the siege. His tactics were genius, making the Pelagians think they were at full strength.
The siege lasted for 50 Donner before the rest of the brigade arrived, and Chessex was taken. Bombardier General Titus Aurelius would be highly decorated for his triumphs at this battle. With Chessex being taken, Pelagia withdrew the brunt of their forces from the north and reinforced Torif, so any ships still out at sea could safely return. In response, Boralia moved to secure Torif. Meanwhile, Daughtris Centari had regained control over Antaria Major. The Pelagians had to withdraw due to attrition losses. After the Pelagian withdrawal, Daughtris Centari sailed across the Strait of Tabriz to assist Boralia. They pincered Torif with Boralia and destroyed the docks, forcing Pelagian vessels to dock elsewhere. With Torif taken, the last target was Pelagus, where again, Boralia and Daughtris Centari blockaded the city. Eventually, due to attrition, the Empire would capitulate for the last time.
What we take away from all of this is that Pelagia, especially under Kalman, could have taken over all of Denel. That is, if they were more patient, and if they employed their doctrine more conservatively. It is clear that no imperial power will be able to overcome the collective will of Denel.
After the Empire capitulated, there were more formal peace talks than after the First Pelagian War. A document called the Imperial Absolution Accord was signed by all present parties, effectively dismantling the Pelagian Empire and separating the nation into 4 smaller nations.
Pelagia, East Pelagia, the Pelagian Basinland, and the Genoese Straits would be 4 separate nations that made up the former Pelagian Empire. Emperor Kalman was elected the democratic leader of Pelagia, and his brother the leader of East Pelagia. East Pelagia would go on to be influenced by Daughtris Centari. Pelagia would be influenced by Boralia, leading to their positions in the Great Doctrinal War. It can be surmised that we arrived at this war for just those reasons, and there are many historical lessons to be learned from it. In the end, only time will tell who will come out on top, and all we can do now is hope that the righteous will be victorious.